The rain had been patient all evening. It had not beaten the shutters or hurried anyone through the tavern door. It simply fell in a silver hush beyond the windows, gathering beneath the eaves and darkening the road until every traveler who entered seemed grateful for the yellow room, the dry benches, and the broad fire breathing at the end of the hearth. Near midnight, when the last bowls had been cleared and even the dice players had grown too comfortable to quarrel over luck, a sailor came in, carrying a small parcel under his coat. He was an old man with salt in the seams of his boots and a narrow white scar across one thumb. He ordered no ale. He asked only for hot water, then sat near the flames and unwrapped the parcel from a square of faded sailcloth. Inside was a little boat carved no longer than a man's hand. It was a plain thing. It had no gilding, no figure at the bow, and no raised cabin where a lord might sit apart from the spray. Its hull had been made from two kinds of wood. One was dark and fine-grained, polished by years of handling. The other was pale, with a small knot near the stern. The seam between them was so close that the firelight seemed to pass across it without noticing. The sailor set the boat on the table and warmed his hands around his cup. One of the younger travelers leaned nearer. He had spent the evening telling anyone who would listen that he had once seen the royal barge on the river Aster, all banners and carved lions, with musicians standing beneath a canopy of blue silk. "That cannot be a king's boat," he said. "There is nowhere for the crown." It was the kind of silence that leaves a chair open for a story. So I drew the boat a little closer to the fire, where all of us could see the two woods joined together. Outside, the rain slipped from the roof in quiet threads, and somewhere in the stable, a horse shifted once, then settled. "There was no place for a crown," I said, "because the man for whom that boat was made had not yet learned whether he meant to wear one, and the woman who built it had no patience for crowns at all. And because the rain seemed willing to remain until morning, I began with the shipyard at Greyhaven, at a time when the tide was out, and almost everything else was going with it. Greyhaven had been built around a harbor, shaped like a cupped hand. At high water, the sea filled its stone quays and lifted fishing boats until their masts stood level with the roofs. At low water, the harbor emptied into winding channels of gray-green mud, leaving hulls tilted on their sides and chains resting where water had been only an hour before. Mara Ven preferred low tide. At low tide, nothing could pretend to float. Cracked pilings showed their soft places. Loose planks declared themselves with a change of color. A vessel that sat too heavily to one side could not blame the waves. It was an honest hour, and honesty was useful in a shipyard. On the morning our tale properly begins, Mara stood beneath the ribs of a half-repaired fishing boat and listened while rain tapped the roof of the open shed. She wore a wool cap pulled low over her dark hair and held 3 square nails between her lips. With one hand, she steadied a fresh plank against the old hull. With the other, she reached for the mallet that her apprentice, Nell Dore, was meant to be holding. The mallet was not there. Mara removed the nails from her mouth. Nell. She was 17, small, sharp-eyed, and able to remember the price of every nail in Greyhaven while forgetting where she had put the tool needed to drive it. "The cooper paid half," Nell said. "The cooper owes all. If Master Vale pays us for this repair before St. Rowan's Day, and if Ivo agrees to wait for the sailcloth money, we can cover the yard lease through the end of autumn." The smaller had been made by Mara's father for coastal boats, the kind that carried wool, salt, apples, and letters between harbors, too modest for the great trading ships. Both cradles had been empty since spring. There had been repairs enough to keep Mara and Nell working, but repairs brought small coins and large arguments. A fisherman might admit that his boat leaked while still insisting that the leak should cost less than a pair of boots. The harbor office had raised the lease after new stonework was ordered for the eastern quay, though the stonework had not yet begun. If Mara could not secure a full commission before the first hard frost, the office would take the smaller strip of her yard as payment. Once that ground was gone, there would be no room to lay a proper keel. Mara set the plank and drove the first nail. Her father had taught her that a nail should sound different when it reached sound wood. The first blows were broad and ringing. The last gave a shorter note, as if the hull had closed a small door around the iron. "Again," Mara said. Nell frowned. "Again what?" By the time the list ended, the new plank was fixed, and the day felt smaller. "We need a commission," Nell said. "I know." Her father had smiled often, even in the last thin year of his life, when orders had gone to the larger yards, and his cough had made each winter morning a negotiation. He had left Mara his tools, his debts, and a reputation that people praised warmly so long as they were not being asked to pay for it. She did not resent him. Resentment, like rot, was most dangerous when hidden. She simply wished that a good name could be stacked like timber and sold by the foot. At the edge of the yard, a bell rang twice from the harbor office. Nell looked toward it. Another notice? He had no servant, no pack horse, and no visible weapon except a small eating knife at his belt. He was young, perhaps 26 or 27, though there were careful lines around his mouth that belonged to someone older. His hair was the color of wet sand. He paused inside the gate, as if allowing Mara the choice of whether to welcome him. Behind him, on the road, waited a covered cart drawn by a patient grey mare. "Mara Ven?" he asked. "That depends on what she owes you." Travelers sometimes did that when their family name carried trouble, and Greyhaven had learned not to pry until trouble became expensive. "I was told you build boats for shallow water," he said. Mara looked past him at the cart. Its canvas cover had been tied down neatly. The wheels were rimmed in new iron, but the driver's bench was empty. "Who told you?" "He said your father built a boat that could cross a wet field and come home on morning dew." Rain ran from Alden's coat and made a dark crescent on the packed earth. "What will it carry?" Mara asked. 6 people in comfort, 10 when necessary, papers kept dry, some tools, food, and perhaps timber or stone samples, nothing heavy for long. "I hope parts of the journey will be pleasant. That is not its purpose. It must be light enough for a small crew and strong enough for autumn weather." She added a shallow keel, broad enough to keep the vessel upright on wet sand, then sketched the stern and the position of 2 removable masts. Alden came nearer, but not so near that his sleeve touched her hand. "No high cabin," he said. "A covered shelter aft would keep 2 passengers dry. A table that can be fixed between them, with a case beneath it for ledgers and maps. I can pay 1/3 now, 1/3 when the hull is closed, and the remainder after the sea trial." Alden did not bargain. 6 weeks, and I pay for 2 additional hands. A landholder's son trying to mend something his family had neglected. "Where is the timber?" she asked. He glanced toward the covered cart. "Part of it is outside. Seasoned oak. I was told it was suitable." 15 years earlier, the late king's officers had requisitioned oak from every harbor between Greyhaven and North Cape. They had promised fair payment after the building of a ceremonial barge and 3 warships. Some yards had received half. Some received nothing. Mara's father had surrendered timber already marked for 2 merchant boats, believing refusal would cost him his license. The merchant contracts went elsewhere. The royal payment arrived 4 winters late and covered less than the interest on his loans. Mara set the charcoal down. "Uncover the cart." Nell ran ahead to bring a scraping knife. Mara climbed onto the wheel, pressed her thumb to the end grain, and smelled the first pale curl she lifted from the wood. Oak, well seasoned, strong enough for the keelson and lower frames. Older than Alden by several years. Near the middle of the first timber, beneath a stain that someone had tried to plane away, Mara found a mark shaped like a crown above 3 waves. Nell saw it too. Royal stores, she whispered. So I was told, Alden said. Mara climbed down. No. May I ask why? The timber came from the old state barge. It is being dismantled. Most of the wood will be sold to pay debts owed by the royal household. This part was reserved for the boat. Alden pulled the canvas farther aside. Beneath the old timbers lay 3 new planks of common coastal oak, pale beside the rest. I will pay for whatever additional material you require, at the full market price, in coin. I thought using it for a vessel that would visit the places from which it came might be fitting. Perhaps that was vanity. Perhaps I wanted the wood to mean something different without first asking whether it had the right. Alden did not sound as if he believed the conversation was over. Leave the cart, she said at last. Take your mare to the anchor house. Nell and I will inspect every piece. Return tomorrow. Nell waited until the gate closed. 1/3 now, she said. Mara looked at her. I am not suggesting that royal theft becomes honest because someone hires a cart. I am observing that the harbour office will take our lower yard in 39 days. Bring the marking lamp. The wood carried more than the Crown and Waves stamp. On the underside of one beam, Nell found a triangle surrounding the letter M. Mara knew it as the mark of a yard at Meerwick, a harbour 3 days south. Another timber had been scored with a tiny 7-pointed star used by the builders at Gull's Rest, Watilai. Near the end of a third, almost erased by the royal stamp laid over it, was a simple V-cut with 2 careful strokes. Mara traced it with her thumb, her father's mark. For a long while, neither she nor Nell spoke. Mara remembered the same shape on beams stacked in the yard when she was 11. Her father had let her cut one mark herself, guiding the knife so the lines would not run with the grain. Those beams had been intended for the keel of a grain ship called the Autumn Mercy. Then the officers came with sealed orders and 6 wagons. Her father had stood by the gate with his cap in his hands, while men loaded away a season of work. She had forgotten the color of the officer's horse. She had forgotten what they ate that evening. But she remembered her father sweeping the empty timber racks after dark, though there was nothing on the ground worth sweeping. Nell touched the beam lightly. Was it his? Now it had returned on a stranger's cart, carrying the marks of every hand that had claimed it. Will you use it? Nell asked. Mara looked toward the harbor. The tide had begun to turn. Water slipped into the channels, covering the mud by patient inches and lifting the smallest boats first. I do not know, she said. That night, Mara stayed after Nell went home. She lit the small iron stove in the design room and placed the marked beam on trestles beneath the window. The room had once been her father's office, though he had disliked sitting in it. Rolled drawings filled one shelf. Samples of rope hung from pegs. The wall above the desk was crowded with half-hull models, each built in thin horizontal layers, so a ship's shape could be studied before a full keel was laid. Mara opened a drawer and found the contract for the Autumn Mercy. The ink had browned. The owner's seal had cracked and fallen away, leaving a red stain. Across the lower corner, in her father's handwriting, were the words, "Timber removed by royal warrant, awaiting settlement." No settlement had ever made the words unnecessary. She laid Alden's beam beneath the old paper and stared until the letters blurred in the stove's warm air. Then she took up charcoal and began to draw the boat. She drew it once as a practical builder, shallow draft, broad middle, modest sail, removable centerboard. She drew it again as the unknown passenger had described it, facing benches, shared shelter, dry case, room to speak without one person sitting above another. On the third drawing, she lowered the gunwales so someone standing on a beach could step aboard without a gangplank. She widened the bow enough to carry tools for repairing markers, piers, or bridges. She placed the old wood where its history could be seen and inspected, not hidden beneath paint. Near midnight, the rain stopped. The yard roof continued dripping for a while, counting out the last of the storm, Mara set down the charcoal. The boat on the page looked unlike the royal barge, and unlike anything her father had built. It would never carry a throne. It was too small for ceremony and too useful for display. There was space for a ruler, perhaps, but no place where he could sit without hearing the others breathe. Mara covered the drawing before she went home. The next morning, Alden returned at first light. He had brushed the mud from his coat and brought Nell a bundle of new quills from the anchor housekeeper, though Nell had not told him that her last good quill was splitting. Mara led him to the marked beam. "This came from my father's yard," she said. Alden looked at the V. He did not touch it. "Then it should be returned to you. Whether or not you build the boat, those are different things. Alden, any unused wood returned to the place it came from. If the owner cannot be found, its value goes to the harbor that lost it. You will not ask less than the work deserves. The builder decides when the boat is ready for the sea. In the years when the Ven yard had been busy, such a beginning would have drawn half the harbor. Children would have been lifted onto shoulders to see the first timber lowered. Neighbors would have brought cider, and someone would have found a sprig of green rowan to place beneath the keel for luck. But Greyhaven had watched too many shipyards close to make a festival of promises. On that cool morning, there were only Mara, Nell, Alden, 2 hired hands, and Ivo Pell, who came limping through the gate with a roll of canvas on his shoulder. Ivo had made sails in Greyhaven for nearly 50 years. He was lean as a furled mast, with pale eyes and a beard that grew more sideways than down. His left knee had never properly forgiven a fall from a naval yardarm, though he told a different story about the fall depending on who was buying the drink. "I heard you had work," he said. "News travels," Mara replied. "Debt travels faster." The sailcloth merchant told the rope maker, who told my sister, who believes every difficulty in Greyhaven can be improved by informing me. The decision had come after 2 nights of measuring and 1 long morning in which she had changed her mind 4 times without admitting to Nell that any change had occurred. Ivo bent over the old beam and found the royal stamp. "So the dead barge has begun giving back its bones," he said. Alden, who had been helping Nell check the frame molds, looked up. "You knew it? What are you calling this one?" Nell showed them the wage page. Each worker's name had a space for days, hours, agreed rate, advances, and final payment. Alden's 1/3 deposit lay in the strongbox. The coin had been counted in front of everyone. Toma read the page twice. "Who is paying?" he asked. "Alden," Nell said. "Alden who?" "For the present, only Alden. He had lost an older brother during the building of the king's warships, not in battle, but beneath a load, lifted by a rope. The overseer had refused to replace. The promised payment to his widow had become a line passed from clerk to clerk until the paper itself vanished. Mara could have reminded Toma that he needed the wages. She could have said that the shipyard needed him more. Both things were true, and neither gave her the right answer. "You have not begun," she said. "You are free to leave. The royal yards promised my brother's widow 12 silver crowns," he said. "They paid 3. The 2 are not connected. Examined by royal clerks, rainwater dripped from the end of the crane beam." Beyond the gate, carts rattled over the harbor stones. Toma asked when the money would be placed. Alden said before noon. Toma said he would return tomorrow if it was. "Your wages begin tomorrow," Nell told him. "They begin now," Alden said. He came at the appointed hour and spent this time because of the work. Bess called measurements, while Nell checked them, and Toma watched the timber settle into its blocks. When the keel finally lay level, Mara placed her palm on the forward end and felt no movement beneath it. Only then did Ivo take a small rowan leaf from his pocket and tuck it beneath the first floor support. "For luck?" Nell asked. "For my sister," he said. "She will ask." Mara and Bess shaped each curve over the lofting floor, where full-size lines had been drawn in chalk. Toma beveled edges and muttered to himself. Nell learned to carry a measurement in her mind, from one side of the hull to the other. Alden came every morning unless business took him away, and when he came, Mara found work for him. He was not a shipwright. He drove nails too cautiously, planed against the grain when tired, and once cut a perfectly made brace half an inch short. He did not blame the saw. "What are you good at?" Bess asked after watching him spoil it. Alden considered. Reading quickly, remembering names, disappointing people in rooms with high ceilings. He learned to heat planks in the steam box until they would accept a curve. He learned that Toma's silence meant concentration, while Mara's silence could mean concentration, annoyance, worry, or simply that she had forgotten anyone else was present. He learned to ask Nell before taking a tool because she knew where every tool belonged, even if she did not always put it there. And the yard began to sound alive again. Mallets answered one another beneath the sheds. Saws moved with their long, dry whisper. The pitch pot warmed near the wall, filling the air with its dark, sharp scent. People passing on the road slowed to look through the gate. A baker began sending yesterday's bread at half price, then pretended to be surprised when Nell paid the full amount from the food allowance Alden had added to the account. Each piece of old timber was recorded. Nell drew its mark, measured its length, and wrote where Mara intended to place it. The beam from Merwick became part of the forward seating. The gull's rest knees strengthened the bow. The Ven timber rested above the keel, joining the boat's center from stem to stern. Mara left the royal stamps visible. "Will you not plane them away?" Alden asked. "No." "Then place a mark beside each stamp when it is repaid." "No," Alden replied. "But perhaps one can build a place where promises are heard before they are made." The table could be removed when cargo or repair materials were needed, but when fixed in place, it gave every seated person an equal reach to the papers. The dry case beneath it held 6 shallow drawers, each with a brass label frame. Alden asked for no lock. "Papers kept dry and thieves welcomed?" Mara asked. "The copies should be public. Requests, findings, orders, costs, names of those responsible. Yet you offer no family name. Give me until the first trial." "The first trial is 3 weeks away," she said. "Then I have 3 weeks." But children change, and Ivo distrusted memory when it offered him importance. So he watched. He watched Alden stand whenever an older woman entered the shed, even if she carried a basket rather than a title. He watched him sign the wage ledger with a hand trained by expensive tutors, each letter formed for reading by clerks who would copy it. He watched him pause when the bells of St. Aura's chapel rang the midday hour, not to pray, but to count. Most of all, he watched Alden react to the royal seal. It came on the 18th day, pressed into blue wax at the bottom of a letter delivered by a rider with dust on his cloak. The rider asked for Lord Alden. Nell said no. Lord worked in the yard. Alden came from behind the hull with shavings in his hair and took the letter before the rider could explain. He broke the seal with his thumb. Only a person long accustomed to royal wax would have done it without looking. Ivo said nothing until evening. The others had gone. Mara was cleaning pitch from a caulking iron when he settled on an overturned bucket nearby. "Do you remember Prince Alden?" he asked. Mara kept scraping. "A thin boy at the old king's funeral. There are rumors he refuses it." "And you waited until now?" "I have also watched him believe that paying what was stolen will make people ready to trust him. It made his omissions heavier." "Will you tell the others?" she asked. "It is not my secret. Men show themselves clearly when Wood refuses their plans." "For what?" She found she wanted Alden to speak first, not because a prince deserved patience, but because the man who had worked beside them might still deserve one chance to choose honesty. Meanwhile, the hull closed. The final plank was fitted on a clear afternoon when the harbor shone between passing clouds. Toma caulked the seams with oakum, driving the fibers deep before sealing them with warm pitch. Bess shaped the low rail. Nell completed the drawers and painted each brass label by hand. North, South, Greyhaven, Rivers, accounts, completed. Alden studied the final word. "That drawer may remain light," he said. "Then you should complete more things," Nell replied. She had become less careful with him over the weeks. Alden seemed to value that more than courtesy. The single shelter stood aft beneath a curved roof of oiled canvas stretched over ash ribs. It was large enough for 2 people to sleep or 6 to crouch together during hard rain. At Mara's insistence, the driest corner belonged not to a passenger's bedding, but to the chart box, spare wool blankets, and a small stove fixed safely in iron. Ivo measured the masts and cut tan sails rather than royal blue. "No color?" Alden asked. "Tan is a color," Ivo said. "It is the color of cloth that has work to do. It stands in shallow water and does not complain about mud." News had spread that the Vineyard was building from the royal barge, and people wished to see what shape old taxes had taken. The guild clerk stood near the gate. The baker brought hot buns. Toma's sister-in-law arrived wearing a blue shawl and carried a copy of the claim now being examined under 3 seals. She did not thank Alden. She thanked Nell for writing her name correctly. That seemed to please him. The boat rested on greased ways pointed toward the rising tide. Its new planks glowed, honey brown. The old wood within was darker, bearing scars. No varnish had concealed. A line had been fixed to the harbor capstan, so the hull would not run too quickly once the wedges were knocked free. Mara walked around it 3 times. She checked every block, every rope, every hand's position. She inspected the tide and the wind. Only when there was nothing left to question did she pick up the mallet. "Has it a name?" someone called. Alden looked to Mara. "Not yet," she said. "Then how will the sea know it?" Toma struck the second. Bess and Nell knocked the supports clear in order. The hull hesitated, as new boats sometimes do, holding to the land for one final breath. Then it slid. Grease shone on the ways. The stern entered first with a soft rising sound. Water folded around the new planks, lifted the hull, and carried it out until the capstan line grew taut. The heron's reflection trembled beneath the bow. No bottle was broken. Mara considered good drink too valuable and glass too unfriendly to bare feet. The baker tossed a heel of bread onto the deck instead, claiming every proper boat should begin with provisions. The crowd remained while the masts were stepped and the tan sails raised. With the tide near full, the boat moved to the outer harbor for its first trial. Mara took the tiller. Toma and Bess handled the sail. Nell sat beside the table with the trial list. Alden took an oar when they left the quay, and to his credit, matched Bess's stroke after only 2 corrections. Ivo stayed ashore. "My knee predicts rain," he said. The sky was blue, but no one argued with a sailmaker's knee. Beyond the harbor wall, the sea rolled in long, low swells left by the weak storms. Mara turned south. The boat answered easily. Its shallow body rose over the waves without striking hard into them. Under sail, it gathered more speed than she had expected and held its course with only a light hand on the tiller. Nell marked each test. Oars at half load, sail close to the wind, turn to port, turn to starboard, shelter fastenings, bilge water, centerboard raised and lowered. "She is sound," Toma said, after the 3rd turn. Mara did not answer. Builders who declare a boat sound too early, invite every loose fastening to prove them vain. They crossed the bay toward a narrow beach beneath chalk cliffs. It was the kind of landing Alden had requested. No quay, no marker, only a pale strip between rocks. Mara raised the centerboard and let the boat glide until its flat keel touched sand. Bess stepped over the low bow without wetting her knees. "Exactly," Alden said quietly. Mara heard more than satisfaction in the word. Relief, perhaps. Urgency. They pushed off again before the falling tide could hold them. On the return, Mara ordered the ballast shifted, then had everyone sit on the same side to test stability. The boat leaned, but did not alarm. She took it across its own wake. She tested the pump. She listened. Every vessel had a language before it had a name. Planks murmured against frames. Ropes spoke through blocks. Water moved beneath the floorboards with small, hollow sounds. Most were ordinary. Some were not. Near the mouth of the harbor, as Bess tightened the forward sail, Mara heard a click beneath the deck. Not loud, not dramatic. A dry note, quickly swallowed by water and canvas. "Hold course," she said. She gave the tiller to Toma and lifted the first floorboard. The old Ven beam ran beneath it. No crack showed. She moved aft, opening boards while Nell held them aside. The click came again when the boat rose on a swell. This time, Mara felt it through her palm. "Lower sail," she said. Alden looked toward the harbor entrance, now less than half a mile away. "What is it?" Mara crawled into the narrow space beneath the benches and pressed her hand along the beam. There, beside the mark her father had cut, the grain had opened into a line thin as a hair. The crack ran only 4 inches. It did not threaten them. Another builder might have filled it, added a brace, and sent the boat on a sheltered journey. Mara sat back on her heels. "We return under oars," she said. "The trial is over." But everyone aboard understood that they had reached the place Evo had warned her about, where Wood had refused a man's plans and left him nowhere to hide but the truth. They entered Greyhaven under oars. The crowd on the quay had thinned, but those who remained could read disappointment in a lowered sail. No one cheered as the boat came alongside. Mara stepped ashore, ordered the mast unstepped, and sent Toma for lifting slings. She answered questions with the same phrase until people stopped asking. "A defect in the old timber. If the beam is braced, could we make one journey and replace it afterward?" With a light load. 3 riders entered the gate, followed by 2 mounted guards in dark blue coats. The first man dismounted before anyone came to hold his horse. He was perhaps 50, with iron gray hair, a narrow face, and the straight posture of someone who had spent years refusing to slump through long meetings. His cloak was excellent, his gloves travel-stained, and the silver clasp at his throat bore the crown above 3 waves. He looked at the boat, the lowered sails, and Alden's tar-marked coat. "Your Majesty," he said, with the weary restraint of a man finding a lost document exactly where he expected it to be. "The Coronation Council has waited 9 days for your answer. I have now ridden through 2 nights to discover that the answer is a boat." Alden faced the newcomer. "Selwyn, this is not the place. At present, that includes its king. Have you been king the entire time we were paying you apprentice wages? I am pleased to hear the realm has not cheated His Majesty of a halfpenny." The seam beneath the floor remained cracked. Work could be trusted to continue being itself. People were less considerate. "Out," she said. Selwyn blinked. "I beg your pardon?" The guards led the horses away. When the gate closed, the Chancellor remained with Alden beneath the shed, while the workers stood at careful distances. "Now," Mara said to Alden, "tell us the part you thought we did not need to know." Then, "Because I found claims from the coast that had been marked, settled when they were not. Timber requisitions, harbor levies, injured workers, roads taxed twice to pay for defenses never built. Every answer from the offices said the matter had occurred under the previous reign and would be examined in time." Selwyn's mouth tightened, but Alden nodded. "In part. I wanted to visit the ports before accepting my father's crown. I wanted to see what remained when no one had time to prepare. She thought of Toma's claim under 3 seals and the coin placed before the truth was proven. Those actions did not become false because the man had concealed his name. Yet concealment had allowed him to be judged without the weight of power, while everyone else had been judged by him with knowledge they did not share. You wanted an honest view, she said. You did not offer one. Mistress Ven, His Majesty's methods may be questioned, but his intent has been to repair serious wrongs. Fen Harbor's council meets tomorrow afternoon. Their quay collapsed 3 years ago because timber assigned for its repair was diverted to the royal barge. The king has requested authority to release stone and funds. The Treasury Council. The boat will not sail tomorrow, Mara said. Alden closed his eyes for a moment. Then I will go overland. We ride through the night. Eldon had seen debts no one wished to count. Selwyn had seen new debts growing while he counted the old ones. The boat between them was both answer and delay. Enough, she said. Nell, remove the floorboards. Toma, rig the forward sling. Bess, fetch the inspection lamps. Once the floor was removed, Mara exposed the entire Ven beam. The crack ran beside an old fastening hole filled during construction. At some point in the royal barge's life, water had entered, frozen, and opened a weakness deep inside. Seasoning had hidden it. The sea trial had made it speak. Mara probed the grain with a narrow knife. The damage was not extensive, but it lay where a simple patch would carry strain from the mast step. Remove the whole beam? Bess asked. Not yet. We can scarf in new oak if we cut beyond the weak grain and add sister braces. Inspection changes an answer. They may dissolve before he arrives. She would remain master of the vessel until the journey was complete. No order, royal or otherwise, would require her to sail in unsafe water. Every claim collected would name a person, a place, and the evidence available. Every promise Alden made would include the office responsible, the source of money or material, and a date for public review. Harbor representatives could reject an agreement without punishment. Copies would remain in the port, in the boat's drawers, and with a third keeper beyond the royal offices. The coastal abbeys, Nell suggested. Their guest house ledgers already move between towns. Governments seem to have more curtains. Majesty, you cannot bind the treasury to unknown claims without council approval. More than a warship. You built this to make silence difficult, he said. Mara built it, Alden replied. I only asked for a place to listen. Mara cut away the weakened wood, removing not only the visible crack, but every darkened fiber around it. The piece bearing her father's vibe came free in her hands. She set it on the bench rather than throw it among the scraps. New oak from Greyhaven was shaped to fit the long diagonal scarf. Bess planed one face while Mara worked the other. Toma drilled for tree nails. Ivo arrived before moonrise with hot broth, listened to the explanation, and sat down to sew reinforcement around the sail's reef points. Even Selwyn removed his fine cloak and turned the capstan when the beam needed lifting. He did so badly at first, giving the rope uneven tension. Toma corrected him without using a title. The Chancellor adjusted his hands and improved. Alden carried water, fetched tools, and did not ask the hour. Near dawn, when the new section was fixed and the braces seated, Mara rested against the hull. The yard had grown quiet, except for the soft scrape of Nell's pen. She was copying the new contract 3 times. Why did you refuse the crown? Mara asked. Alden sat on the floorboards, his back against a frame. Because everyone spoke of it as my inheritance. I had read what else I inherited. But perhaps I also believed I could remain only Alden while I learned what a king must answer for. Do not make it ceremonial. Then she raised the tan sail for Fen Harbor. They left Greyhaven with 6 aboard, Mara at the tiller, Alden, Nell, Ivo, Selwyn, and Bess, who had been chosen over Toma because she knew the new frames better and because Toma disliked journeys whose floor would not remain still. The northbound current helped them. Greyhaven's walls grew small behind, and the coast opened into long brown cliffs broken by coves. Nell arranged the drawers. Selwyn brought royal records, sealed orders, and treasury tables. Alden brought a list of ports. Mara brought spare rope, pitch, tools, food, and enough blankets for everyone because plans did not keep people warm. Ivo brought the little piece of cracked Ven timber. Why? Mara asked when she found it in his bag. It has not finished being useful. Small fishing boats crossed between them. Larger vessels anchored far out, where flat-bottomed lighters charged a fee to carry every sack and barrel ashore. The council bell was ringing as Mara lowered sail. "Too late," Selwyn said. "Not yet," Alden replied. The river entrance had silted since the old charts were drawn. Mara saw 2 possible channels, neither marked. She sent Ivo to the bow with the sounding pole. They moved under oars, measuring depth stroke by stroke. The boat's shallow keel passed where a deeper royal vessel would have grounded. People gathered along the broken waterfront. At first, they watched only the unfamiliar hull. Then someone recognized the crown stamp on the visible timber near the forward bench. The murmur traveled faster than the boat. "That is ours," a woman called. Mara turned the bow toward a muddy landing and let it touch gently. Alden stepped forward, but she stopped him with an arm. "The builder leaves first," she said, "until they know why you came." At their center stood a woman in a dark green cloak with iron-gray hair braided around her head. She carried no staff of office, but people made room when she moved. "Mara Ven of Greyhaven," Mara said. "I built this boat with timber, taken for the old royal barge. We found the Merwick mark, the gull's rest star, and my father's 5. Which is yours?" Then the barge owners offered new terms. They will rebuild half the quay if we grant them 20 years of exclusive unloading rights. "Did you come to return 1 curved timber and call the account settled?" "The council will sit again after supper." Alden took no raised chair. Mara and Nell set the boat's table across 2 trestles. Selwyn opened the records. The meeting lasted until the lamps burned low. The old order had assigned 30 oak timbers to Fen Harbor and then redirected 22 to the royal barge. 8 reached the town. The treasury account showed all 30 delivered because a clerk had copied the dispatch order as proof of receipt. Later petitions were marked, answered when Fen Harbor received letters saying the matter was under review. Maud placed each paper beside the rotted remains of the town's copies. "What will you do?" she asked Alden. He began as he had practiced in his mind. The crown would rebuild the quay. The town would be repaid. The wrong would be corrected. Nell's quill did not move. Mara waited. Maud folded her hands. "With which timber?" "Stone piers would last longer, but the nearest quarry is under contract through spring. Alden could order funds reserved, but the Treasury Council had to release them. The harbor could begin surveying immediately, but a winter survey might need repeating after spring floods. The town could contribute labor, but not if fishermen lost the season that paid for their food. Nell wrote only when a statement contained a responsible person and a date. At last they reached an agreement less grand than Alden's first promise and more likely to survive him. The Crown would fund an immediate independent survey. Greyhaven's guild would nominate 1 builder. Fen Harbor would choose another. By midwinter, the Office of Coastal Works would present timber and stone designs with full costs. The Treasury Council would vote publicly before the first spring market. Until construction opened the quay, royal grain shipments would reimburse half the lighter fee for local households, preventing the private barge owners from gaining a monopoly through hardship. Maud read every line. "And if the Treasury refuses? The names and votes will be copied to each coastal guild and abbey. I will return to Fen Harbor to answer for the refusal. Bowls simply appeared when the difficult work was done. Alden ate beside the lighter owners, who feared losing their livelihoods if the quay returned. Maud asked them to propose roles in the future harbor rather than defend a broken system because it paid them. Selwyn spoke with the millers about grain fees. Nell made 3 copies until her fingers cramped. Mara went outside. The tide had fallen. The boat rested upright on the mud, its shallow keel settled exactly as designed. Children walked around it with lanterns. One had climbed onto the low bow and was tracing the Fen Harbor mark with a finger. Maud came to stand beside Mara. "You left the stamp visible," she said, "so no one forgets where it traveled. Removing it would require replacement, but would not harm the hull if done in a yard. It belongs to you. I also inspect the joinery. We will set it in the council hall, where it can remind us that returned things should still be examined for cracks." The boat floated beside the broken quay, with Fen Harbor's agreement dry in the northern drawer. Before they could leave, however, a bell began ringing from the river mouth. It was not the council bell. It was the low iron bell used when boats waited beyond the reeds and could not find the channel. Maud climbed the bank and shaded her eyes. Mist lay over the sea, thin near shore, but thick beyond the outer sandbar. The bell sounded again, then twice in reply, farther south. 3 provision boats, she said. They were due yesterday. A deep vessel entering the wrong branch would ground on the bar and might lose the tide before evening. Alden looked at Mara. She was already checking the sounding poles. "We go slowly," she said, "and every person aboard does exactly what Bess tells them when she is at the bow. Why me?" The mist received them without drama. Reeds faded behind. The harbor sounds thinned until there was only the creak of oarlocks, the dip of the sounding pole, and the distant iron bell. 6 feet, Bess called. Then 5. Oss pointed east. Mara turned a hand's breadth. The current pressed differently against the tiller. Beneath them, the sandbar moved in long hidden ridges shaped by every storm and tide. 4.5. Mara did not lead them in at once. She and Oss marked the safe line with spare floats, each weighted by a stone from Fen Harbor's bank. Alden and Maud lowered them in order. Bess recorded the depth and current at every turn. Evo watched the sail and warned when the mist began to thin. By midday, a temporary path of small red flags curved through the channel. The boat guided the flower vessel first. It followed at a careful distance, appearing and disappearing like a dark house in cloud. When its keel passed the shallowest turn, voices carried softly from its deck. No cheering, only relief. The other boats came behind, one with lamp oil and one with dried beans, salt, and winter cloth. People on the shore rang the council bell as the vessels entered. The sound moved across the mist in slow circles. Alden stood near the bow, wet to the knees from setting floats. "We should replace the markers before leaving." Alden paid for permanent stone markers from his travel account, but Maud made Nell write that the payment was a bridge, not a gift. Fen Harbor's masons would design the bases. The boat crews would place them after the next spring tide. The Royal Harbor Office would maintain them for 5 years, after which the arrangement would be reviewed. When all 3 provision boats were safely moored, Mara returned to her boat and checked the repaired beam. The scarf was dry. The braces had not shifted. Beside the old crown stamp, Fen Harbor's double crescent seemed to watch her hand. Wood had refused Alden's first plan. Because it had, they had arrived late with better questions. That evening, as mist rose from the river and warm lamplight filled the net hall, Nell placed the first completed harbor agreement in the drawer she had labeled Completed. The drawer was not light anymore. They remained in Fen Harbor for 3 more days. The permanent markers could not be made so quickly, but the work that would produce them could begin. Maud chose 2 masons to measure the riverbed. OSS took Bess and Nell through the channel at every stage of the tide, recording how the current changed around the sandbars. Selwyn sent sealed copies of the agreement, south by road, and a second set inland to the Abbey of St. Lorne, whose brothers kept toll and harvest records for half the coast. Alden spent the first day in the net hall hearing claims. By noon, a line reached into the lane. Some were royal debts. A ropemaker had supplied cordage 10 years earlier and received only a stamped receipt. A farmer had lost a wagon to requisition and still possessed the order that promised its return. 2 sisters said their mother's ferry license had been revoked after she refused free passage to an officer's household. Other troubles had little to do with the crown. Neighbors disputed a drainage ditch. A fisherman believed the miller's geese were eating bait from his baskets. An elderly man wanted the king to command his grandson to write more often. Alden tried to hear everyone. By evening, he could no longer remember which ropemaker had brought which receipt. Nell closed the north drawer on his hand before he could place another paper inside. "This is not listening," she said. "This is collecting confusion." At the top were spaces for name, place, date, and the person making the claim. Beneath came the event, the evidence, the office involved, the action requested, and the next date on which an answer was due. At the bottom were 3 lines: received by, assigned to, and copied to. "What of matters that do not concern the crown?" Alden asked. "They go to Maud or the local council. If they concern geese, perhaps directly to the geese." One was a retired fish seller who wrote slowly and asked excellent questions. The other was Maud's nephew, who wrote quickly and had to be taught not to improve people's words by making them sound more official. On the 3rd morning, the line outside the net hall was shorter, not because fewer people had trouble, but because the town now possessed a way to receive it after the king sailed. That mattered more than Alden had expected. "I thought my duty was to hear them," he told Mara as they loaded the drawers aboard. "Your duty is to make sure they do not need to find you personally before they can be heard." Maud came as far as the river mouth, where the red temporary markers leaned in the current. She stepped into a fishing boat to return. "At midwinter," she called to Alden, "whether the treasury is ready or not. That is why I told you." Some had lights maintained by families whose names appeared nowhere in the royal accounts. Every safe arrival depended on local knowledge held by people who were rarely invited into rooms with high ceilings. Merwick was not another Fen Harbor. Its quay stood sound, its market was busy, and the yard whose triangle mark appeared on the boat had survived the requisitions. Its owner, Mistress Hale, was nearly 80 and still came down each morning to inspect the apprentices' work. She recognized the timber immediately. "My husband shaped that," she said, pressing 2 fingers to the triangle. "Badly at first. I made him do it again." When Alden offered payment, she refused coin for herself. "The yard endured," she said. "Others did not. Pay for 2 winter apprentices from families whose shipwork was lost. They learn here, then return to any coast town that will give them a bench. If the court chooses, I will receive 2 lords' sons who think oak is a kind of horse." At Gull's Rest, the old star-marked timber brought no surviving owner. The yard had closed, its master had died, and his children had moved inland. The town council proposed that the repayment support a new harbor crane. Then a washerwoman named Else came to the boat after sunset. She carried a bundle of shirts and said her father had worked at the lost yard. He had not owned the timber, but he and 7 others were owed their final month's wage when the business failed. 2 were still living in town. The council chairman had known. He had simply considered the debt too small to place before a king. Alden asked Else what proof remained. "None that a palace will like," she said. "Only the same memory in several old heads." Mistress Hale sent an old account showing that the Gull's Rest Yard had purchased nails from Merwick in its final month, confirming it had still employed a full crew. Selwyn proposed that the claim be paid from the value of the returned timber and marked supported by testimony rather than proven by record. "Will that create a dangerous example?" the council chairman asked. "Only for people who have ignored several old heads saying the same thing," Selwyn replied. The workers were paid. The remainder went toward the crane, with their names cut on a small iron plate near its base. It was at Gull's Rest that Alden began to understand the difference between traveling secretly and listening beyond ceremony. He no longer hid his name. Instead, he asked who had not been invited into the council room. He visited the rope walk, the fish sheds, the bakehouse that supplied ships, and the narrow lane where sailors' widows rented rooms. He heard praise as cautiously as complaint. A harbour master, eager to flatter the crown, could conceal as much as a clerk, eager to avoid blame. Nell's drawers filled, but they no longer filled without order. Some claims were denied. A wool merchant demanded payment for goods he said had been taken by soldiers, but his own ledger showed the cloth sold elsewhere. Alden did not pay him for the sake of appearing generous. Another man blamed a royal tax for the loss of his boat until Bess found that the hull had been condemned 2 years before the tax was charged. Repair required truth in both directions. Each evening, copies were made. One remained in town. One went into the boat. One traveled to an abbey or guild. The practice was slow. It consumed paper, ink, lamp oil, and patience. It also made disappearance more difficult. By the time they reached the Abbey of St. Lorne, autumn had deepened. Bracken along the cliffs had turned copper. The sea carried a low evening swell, and smoke from inland farms lay blue above the hills. The abbey stood at the mouth of a narrow valley where a fresh stream met the tide. Its guesthouse served ship crews during storms, and its archive held generations of agreements because abbots changed less often than ministers. The brothers gave them beds, hot barley soup, and a dry room for the records. Selwyn had received messages at every harbour. He had read them privately and answered in the same neat hand. At St. Lorne, he asked Alden to walk with him before supper. Mara did not mean to follow. She had gone to inspect the boat's mooring in the Abbey Cove and found them standing on the path above it. Their voices carried in the still air. "The Western lords have withheld the road levy," Selwyn said. "They claim no uncrowned king may confirm the collectors. In the north, 2 governors have extended emergency grain powers that should have ended with your father's funeral. They say they await your formal reign before returning them. It is a poor argument, but poor arguments prosper when a king makes himself absent. But you have treated the crown as though wearing it would excuse your father's failures. I tell you now that refusing it does not excuse yours. You will never know enough." The tan sail had been furled. Through the fading light, the old crown marks and new harbour marks were both visible inside the hull. "The Coronation Council wanted an answer," he said. "It still does," Selwyn replied. "Tell them I will return. Set the coronation for 12 days after we reach the capital, Tiba. I can have horses ready at dawn. We leave when it turns after sunrise. Everyone is different when a room rises as they enter. For 2 days, the weather held clear and cold." They sailed past Gull's Rest and Merwick without entering, carrying the coast's records south. On the 3rd morning, the wind shifted east and pressed short waves across the bay. The boat handled them well. Mara shortened sail before anyone asked. Near noon, a shudder moved through the forward bench. It was lighter than the click at the sea trial, but Mara felt it through her boot. She handed the tiller to Bess and opened the forward floorboards. The Gull's Rest knee, one of the curved timbers taken from the royal barge, had split around an old iron hole. The wood had once been drilled and plugged. Salt had remained deep inside, weakening the grain where no inspection blade had reached. The split was stable while the sail stayed reefed. It would not remain so in heavier water. "There is a cove west of here," Ivo said, "used by kelp cutters. An abandoned kelp shed stood above the beach, its roof mostly sound. They carried tools and records inside before a thin rain began. The repair could not be made with a brace. The knee had to come out. "We have no matching oak," Bess said. "We have the forward spare," Mara replied. The spare was new Greyhaven timber, straight rather than curved. Shaping it would require cutting across much of its depth and steaming a bend. It was possible, but not before the next day. Alden looked toward the sea. The coronation date? Once is enough. The old royal timber lay outside in the rain. Its gull's rest star had been marked as received after the workers were paid, but payment did not make the wood sound. Mara realized she had wanted too badly for every old piece to remain in the boat. It made a beautiful symbol. Harm transformed, theft turned toward repair. Yet some things could not be made safe by giving them a nobler purpose. Keeping them only because the story pleased her would be another kind of vanity. She carried the split knee to the firewood pile. Evo stopped her. "Not there. I wondered why you brought that," Mara said. "Small work for long evenings." Selwyn read the promise pages aloud. So Alden could mark which orders required action upon arrival. Nell corrected him whenever he skipped a date. Bess slept near the door, wrapped in 2 blankets. Mara fitted the new knee by lamplight. By dawn, it sat firmly against the frame. The pale wood looked almost too clean among the older timbers. Mara left it uncolored. Beside it, she cut the date, the place, and a small open circle to show that the material had been bought honestly and fitted by choice. "No royal stamp?" Alden asked. "The tree did not grow for you." A little hull emerged between his fingers. They reached Greyhaven 4 days later. The harbor knew of their return before they passed the wall. Bells rang from the Guildhall. Thomas stood at the Venyard gate with half the town behind him and his sister-in-law at his side. Her claim had been confirmed. The remaining 9 silver crowns were hers, along with interest, calculated by Nell's method and approved by all 3 examiners. Toma did not thank Alden with a speech. He handed him the first treenail for Fenharbor's survey boat, which the yard hoped to build in spring. "For work still owed," he said. Alden accepted it. At the yard, Mara inspected every plank and fastening. The boat had crossed the coast, carried agreements, marked a channel, survived 2 honest defects, and returned without pretending that history had strengthened the wood. She signed the final trial page. "The vessel is sound," she said. It was the first time she had allowed herself the words. The next morning, they sailed for the capital. There was no royal canopy. Evo's tan sails remained. Selwyn sent word that Alden would arrive at the common South Quay, where fishing boats, packet vessels, and river barges landed. By the time the capital's towers appeared beyond the bends of the Aster, people crowded both banks. Alden stood near the bow, but asked that no royal banner be raised. "They should know which boat," Selwyn said. "They will see the one without gold." She sent it back empty and slept that night beneath the shared shelter, listening to the river move around the hull. The capital was louder than Greyhaven, but water against planks spoke the same language everywhere. 12 days later, Alden was crowned. Mara attended because Nell wished to see whether the ceiling was truly as high as everyone said. It was higher. The coronation hall shone with lamps, polished stone, embroidered banners, and enough gold to repair several modest quays. Lords and officers stood in ordered rows. Maud came from Fenharbor, wearing her dark green cloak. Mistress Hale came from Merwick, and complained that the ceremonial benches were poorly joined. Toma sat beside his sister-in-law. When the crown was carried forward, Alden looked at it for a long moment. Then he knelt. He did not accept it because the coast had forgiven him. The coast had not. He did not accept it because every debt had been paid. Most had only been named. He accepted it because power left Unused did not remain empty. It gathered in the hands of those least troubled by responsibility. The crown settled on his head. Afterward, when the hall began the long business of formal greetings, Alden left the raised dais and came to the coastal benches. "Does it feel heavy?" Nell asked. Several courtiers looked shocked. "Yes," he said. "Good." He looked both changed and entirely the same. The man who had spoiled a brace by half an inch, now wearing the object he had feared would make every mistake sacred. "The boat has no chair for that," she said, nodding at the crown. "Then I will leave it ashore." It did not promise that every old wrong would be repaired at once. It established how claims would be recorded, copied, examined, funded, denied, or completed. No order was marked answered merely because a letter had been sent. The date of action and the person responsible had to appear beside it. Treasury votes, affecting a named harbor, were posted in that harbor. Abbeys and guilds kept copies beyond the palace archive. Fenharbor received its survey before midwinter. The treasury approved stone piers and an oak deck in the spring vote. Construction began after the fishing season, so families did not have to choose between rebuilding the quay and earning their winter food. The lighter owners formed a transport guild and won the contract to move stone, preserving their work without preserving the town's dependence. Mistress Hale trained the first 2 coastal apprentices. One was Toma's niece. The other was the son of a cooper from Gull's Rest, who discovered that he preferred drawing curves to hammering hoops. The new harbor crane at Gull's Rest lifted its first cargo with the names of the unpaid workers visible at its base. Not every promise succeeded. A bridge project ran over cost. One tax office delayed its records until Selwyn removed the keeper. A northern governor continued to dispute Alden's authority and was brought before a court rather than quietly pardoned. The completed drawer gained papers, but the other drawers were never empty. That was as it should be. An empty record can mean peace. It can also mean no one is permitted to write. The Ven Yard received a contract to maintain the boat for 5 years. Nell read every line before Mara signed. The price was posted at Greyhaven's Guildhall. 2 other yards were invited to inspect the work. Annually, and apprentices from the coastal program joined each inspection. Mara refused the title of Royal Shipwright. "It comes with rooms near the court docks," Alden told her during his first return voyage. "My roof leaks in only 3 places. I have no wish to learn the habits of a new roof." Sometimes he came aboard with ministers, sometimes with masons, clerks, millers, or people carrying petitions folded into coat pockets. He wore plain wool at sea. The crown remained in the capital, where it could make the high rooms remember that he would return. The boat eventually acquired a name, though not by decree. Harbor children called it the Open Tide after the charter in its drawers. The name passed to sailors, then to the official accounts, where some clerk finally wrote it in careful ink. Years later, when Fenharbor's new quay was complete, Mara brought back the curved knee bearing the cross and 2 crescents. It no longer supported the bow, having been replaced during the boat's first full maintenance. Maud set it above the council door. "Received, not settled," the double crescent still said. Below it, the council kept a public board with current work, responsible names, and review dates. People complained that the board was never finished. Maud answered that neither was a harbor. As for the small boat, Evo carved in the kelp shed. He completed it on the final passage to the capital. One half of the hull came from the dark, Ven beam removed after the first crack. The other came from the pale new oak that replaced the Gull's Rest knee. He joined them so closely that Mara had to turn the carving toward the light to find the seam. There was no figure at the bow, no cabin, and no place for a crown. Evo gave it to Mara. "What work does this do?" she asked. "It reminds a builder that small things may carry a large design." The new part had not been disguised. Neither carried the whole shape alone. The open tide sailed for many years. It did not make Alden a perfect king. No boat can do such unreasonable work. It carried him where officials could not prepare every answer. It gave him a place where a fisher and a chancellor sat on the same kind of bench. It returned him often to Greyhaven, where Mara listened to the hull and told him when a promise had begun to strain. And because records remained in many hands, the journey continued even when the king was elsewhere. Here in the tavern, the rain had stopped while the story was being told. No one had noticed the final drops leave the eaves. The fire had settled into a red, steady glow, and the youngest traveler sat with his chin near his chest, dreaming perhaps of tan sails on a quiet grey sea. The old sailor reached across the table and turned the little boat once in the light. Now we could see that the dark wood held a faint vibe, no larger than the mark a needle might leave. On the pale stern was an open circle. The traveler who had boasted of seeing the royal barge spoke more softly than before. So it was made for a king, after all. It was lighter than it looked. Outside, water moved in the roadside ditch, making its way toward streams, rivers, harbors, and all the patient places where land gives way to sea. The clouds had opened in the west. A few stars shone between them, reflected faintly in the wet stones. One by one, the travelers rose for their beds. The sailor finished his hot water. The fire gave a quiet sigh as a coal settled inward. Near the door, the tavern keeper turned the wooden sign from open to closed and drew the bolt without hurry. No traveler remained expected that night. Coats steamed gently on their pegs, boots dried beneath the benches, and the old building held its warmth. And there, for just a moment before the sailcloth closed, the two woods seemed not old and new, royal and common, taken and purchased, but simply joined. Not because their histories had vanished, not because every debt had been paid. They were joined because careful hands had left the seam visible and made it strong enough to carry forward. Then the little boat was covered, the lamps were lowered, and the room grew still while the tide, somewhere beyond the dark road, continued its return.